what is the rationale for the prohibition of homosexual activity in your religion? Oh, what is the rationale for? Oh, right, where's that question gone? Oh, right, oh, rather. Rationale for, right, homosexual activity. What is that? Is that like camp behavior? Homosexual. No, I've explained this in a lot of detail previously. That look, there's a difference of opinion as well, believe it or not, even in this, because what does homosexual activity mean? And I think really this comes back to me earlier on when I was speaking about the fiqh texts, and I was saying that they are out of sync. You have to see that fiqh does capture a lot of sunnah, but on the same kind of token, what it does is it's a lot of opinion as well, because there's contemporary issues of their age that they're responding to. So Islam, in my understanding, didn't really address homosexuality so clearly. I think what Islam did is it just focused on family, and it understood that for a society to be built upon a strong foundation, for it to kind of set out a trajectory for a civilization, we need healthy family units. Okay, so we need kind of households with healthy families, with kind of and by healthy I don't just mean physically healthy, but mentally, and they have stability, and that kind of, they are kind of grounded. So what Islam did was, it kind of, to do that, it needed people to shoulder the responsibility of a relationship. But as men often would rather just chill and rather not kind of shoulder responsibilities, so it outlawed any sexual activity unless through marriage. Now, this is as a main understanding, a mainstream. I'm not saying, I'm trying to kind of, it is a bit simplified, it is a bit simplistic, but it's to get, so you can get the gist of it. Now, by doing so, as a byproduct, it outlawed things like homosexuality. So homosexuality became outlawed as a byproduct. The main thing what Islam was trying to do was set up a family unit. That's in my understanding, because there are no clear hadith to do with homosexuality at all that are sahih and sarih. And I've been through some of them in the past. So that's what I think. Then I think the other issue, so that's one layer. The other layer was the Muslim attitude, or the attitude of Muslim scholarship towards towards anal sex. This became I think this became another, I don't know if I can say a spanner in the works, or a pain in the butt, shall I say? Right, it became another problem. A problem, this one. So what happened is, a lot of the ulama started to declare that haram as well. By declaring that haram, they were homosexual relationships, especially male homosexual relationships, were deemed kind of, well, they've gone anyway then. So, but that said, not everybody considered anal sex haram. I mean, many, in fact, some of the transmissions from Imam Malik were that it wasn't. Many of the Malikiya argued for its permissibility. The Shia argued that for its permissibility. But it wasn't that they were arguing for just anal sex, but they were saying that, look, any sexual practice between a couple is their business, as Imam Malik's teacher said. He said that when people are behind closed doors, it's their business, it's nobody else's business. So they had that kind of approach. So there was a diversity as well, but people tried to silence this diversity. So that's the second layer of the kind of problems that many scholars, because they then outlawed things like anal sex and stuff like that, it by extension further distanced the legitimacy and permissibility of homosexuality. The third layer is, and I think this one was utterly cruel, I'm just going to be honest, was hermaphrodites, okay, which in the Arabic language and in the Sharia were referred to as khuntha. So in Arabic you have the term khuntha. Now khuntha is sometimes they call it khuntha mushkil, right? But khuntha is in Arabic a hermaphrodite. So it's a person, either I suppose in some ways maybe like transgender to some extent, but they were people that were usually, it was biological. So it wasn't kind of usually done by choice in the past, it was more biological. So it could have been somebody born with both genitals. It could have been somebody born with neither, as in proportionately or accurately, as in their genitals were just completely distorted. Or it could have been somebody who was kind of in between. So maybe he had male, he had the male private parts, but however he developed as a woman. So he started to develop breasts and things like this later on in life. And so, or vice versa, it could have been, apparently a girl, but as she started to age and go through puberty, she started to develop like a boy. Started to, maybe had an Adam's apple and voice and beard and things like this. So these people are called khuntha in Arabic. Okay. Now, this ain't that common nowadays, because I think nowadays there's a lot of medication to kind of to deal with these situations. So they will either try and do that at a young age, or as they hit puberty, they will then do correction. They will correct the procedure. So if, let's say, for example, this person was like a boy, but then kind of grew into a woman. So as he went through puberty, he developed breasts and didn't have an Adam's apple, and he felt like a woman, and except he had a penis. In that case, the doctors or the medical procedure would correct that. And likewise with the opposite. So I think today it isn't really that common. But in the past, these things were very common. And you had then eunuchs as well. So in the past, people sometimes castrated, it's like when you mention, and every guy in the room will just be like, just the thought of it, isn't it? It's like, everybody's like, God, toba, toba, toba. They're like, wait, just kill me instead. just get it over and done with. You know what? Why don't you take the blade a bit higher and just go there? But damn, right? So, so there were people that were castrated, and I think what actually boomed that market, right? What really boosted that market was that a lot of royalty and the aristocracy felt comfortable and really had a demand for eunuchs, because what they felt was the eunuch didn't have a penis and therefore he couldn't screw their women, but on the bright side he was still a man, so he was as strong as a man, so he could still do the work like a man. Like he could get stuff done and carry things and do all this. And so there was a huge kind of, seems to be a rise in the number of eunuchs as well. But my point of saying this was the scholars of the past very clearly write, very clearly, that al-khuntha la tankih wa la tunkah. That a khuntha cannot do a nikah and cannot have a nikah done to them. They cannot partake in nikah. And I think that seriously is just outright dhulm. That is utter dhulm. So I'm not, and the khuntha wasn't necessarily just the eunuchs. I mean, it was initially, and it generally was, hermaphrodites. Now, But they just said no. Because, why? Just because they didn't know how to answer the question. Because some of them would have been like women, except they just had a penis. So in that case, if they did get married, their sexual intercourse would have been, I suppose, unless unless they were the driving force in the relationship, well, it would have been an it would have been an anal relationship. They would have been like, listen, don't be so anal about this. But the point is that because the scholars didn't want to deal with the situation, they just said that a khuntha can never get married. That was that was the Islamic solution, which is ridiculous. It is absurd. So that goes to show, that's a perfect case study to show the failing of scholarship in a particular era. That the scholars failed in providing a truly Islamic answer to the challenge. So that's I think these layers, when you look at them, it demonstrates so there's been these issues. Right, so I hope that's enough. Somebody said, the Ottomans weren't caliphs. Did all the scholars say that? Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. I'll still continue my research. I've not so extensively researched khunthas, hermaphrodites, but wherever I have read about them in the fiqh books throughout the years, they've always just said, La tankih wa la tunkah. It cannot marry, and nobody can marry it. And I think that's just so cruel. But what was interesting, and I shared this story once before, ages ago, is you see Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, the Maliki legend from Muslim Spain. Now, he speaks about, because what's interesting is in the past, it seems to be wherever people were kind of stuck, they found a loophole, if you like, with servants. And this is, it's like it's just another layer of drama, isn't it? So it's like somebody had asked before, what was their attitude towards homosexuality? So what they would do is they would just, if they were feeling bisexual or homosexual or bisexual, then if they didn't have an apparent outlet, they would just do that with their servants and slaves. And the same thing here with khunthas. Presumably khunthas would then just settle with servants and slaves and things like that if they could afford them. Now, Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, who is a legend of Muslim Spain from about 900 years ago, he writes in some of his journals that when he travelled to the East in his time, so he bumps into Imam Ghazali, and he studies with Imam Ghazali, studies with him in the desert. So one of his kind of recollections, he writes that, I remember there used to be this guy that used to turn up to class. And so remember, they're in tents. They're out in the kind of desert wilderness, if you like. So there ain't people out there. And so they're there, and they would turn up to class, and it's just, there ain't many facilities, there ain't many things. But one of the students was this khuntha. He was a guy. So Ibn Arabi writes about him, the Maliki scholar, the judge and faqih. He says this guy used to turn up. He said he had a big beard, right, and he was apparently like a man. But he said at the same time he had he had big breasts. So this guy would turn up, he had big breasts, breasts, big beard and breasts. No, that's Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi. What kind of thoughts are you putting in my mind? Qadi, where are you? I'm going to have to burn his books now. So, right, so Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi says that, he says he would turn up to class and he used to have these two kind of servant girls with him all the time. So they used to turn up as well. And he says, I used to think to myself, does he get it on with them? So Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi is writing this in his books. And he says, I used to think to myself, does he get it on? Like, is he more like a man or is he like a woman? And you see, and he says, I wanted to go and ask him. I wanted to kind of muster the courage and turn up and ask him that, look, listen, do you know, man, or woman, or what? And he says, but I never got to. And when he's writing this journal, see, the awesome thing about Abu Bakr ibn Arabi is he kind of slides his journal into all his works, his commentaries on hadith and things like this, like in his Masalik or in his Aridatul Ahwadi, his commentary on Tirmidhi or the Muwatta or things like this. Now, he says that, and when I'm writing this, it's been 10 years now. Like 10 years ago this was. And he says, or I think longer than 10 years actually, but he says that he's writing this years later. And he says, and it still beats him, this thing does, that was the was the guy getting it on or not? Was he a man? Was he a woman? What was? And he says, even now I wish I'd just asked him. Yo Qadi. So, you know, whenever you're bothered with some thoughts on a strange day, on a depressed day, or when you're really struggling with some challenges and your mind is weighing down on you, remember that there was a Qadi out there who was weighed down with greater problems than yours.